The American dream, if I've witnessed it in terms of being a founder of our great political party that gives throughout the world. I'm proud of our accomplishments. Let me start out at the beginning by telling you that in my time, we were the Federalist Party. You might want to know something about the differences between the parties at our time, and maybe it still exists today as between the Democrats and our Republican Party. First of all, we Republicans today and yesteryear tended to be more conservative, not only in our economics, but also in our personal habits. We were fairly prim and proper, and we always made sure we kept our window shades drawn. But really, our behavior was pretty tame, and we really didn't have to. The Jeffersonians, on the other hand, never kept their window shades drawn, but they were so outlandish, they really should have. Also, we Federalists tended to very carefully follow the financial pages of the newspapers. They put them at the bottom of their bird cage. We Federalists tended to be proper people. We raised dahlias and Dalmatians, and the Jeffersonians, on the other hand, like today, raised kids, hell, and taxes. We Republicans, we Federalists rather, feel very much at home here today, tended to stick to our own kind, and we married Federalist girls. But before finally settling down, we thought that we were entitled to a last good time fling with Jeffersonian girls. And then most significantly, and this worked against us, and it's why we lost in 1800 and finally went out of power as Federalists, the fact is, being somewhat more conservative and proper, we tended to sleep in separate beds, sometimes even in separate bedrooms. The Jeffersonians, on the other hand, slept in the same bed. And that's why, at that time, there were more Jeffersonians than there were Federalists. Let me start at the beginning. I was born to a single mom. She was very poor. Once in a while, she could scrape enough money together to buy my brother and myself books, and books became sort of my crutch in the impoverished world in which we lived. Also, at the age of 10 years old, I went to work for the import-export firm of Nicholas Kruger. Now, he was quite a dandy, and he liked to spend his time going to New York City at the time. And when I was 14, he left me alone to deal with salty old sea captains. I had to know exchange rates. I had to know the laws of supply and demand, when to raise prices, when to lower them. But it was very good training for my future position as Secretary of the Treasury. I also had the benefit of being taken in intellectually by the Reverend Hugh Knox, the Presbyterian minister there, who had a tremendous library. And so I read voraciously. I did not have the benefit, since I was poor at the time, of having formal schooling. But by reading voraciously, I did quite well, I must say. And being a good clergyman, Reverend Hugh Knox was good at knowing how to twist the arms of people who had money. And I was known as a bright young lad and had a real penchant for science. And so he put the arm on some of the wealthy businessmen to collect enough money to send me to college in order to become a physician. And, but to do that, I had to go through a prep school and take 2 years of solid work in order to qualify. Because in order to get admitted to college in those days, you had to be able to not only translate the Greek and Latin into English, but the English into Greek and Latin. John Todd, when you went to KU, did you have to do that to get admitted? Okay. Yeah. Well, I was taken to meet with President Witherspoon, the president of the College of New Jersey, and I told him right off the bat, after he let it be known he was impressed with me, that I was in a hurry, I was getting a late start, and I wanted to go through the College of New Jersey in 2 years. He looked at me rather sternly and said, "Young man, if James Madison could spend 4 years here, so could you." Well, I didn't appreciate that. And so I returned back to the home that I was staying with in Elizabethtown. And one of the young men there, a rising young lawyer by the name of John Jay, was dating one of the beautiful daughters of the household. And so I borrowed his horse and I rode on into New York City. And there I met with the president of King's College. He was quite impressed. By the way, does anybody here know what King's College is called today? Columbia. Good. See, we've got some bright people in the audience here. Well, at King's College, I love the science, but I found I loved political philosophy even more, being able to study the great thinkers of the world. And there were two who particularly impressed me. One was David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, who emphasized the importance of realism, of not getting confused between what is and what ought to be. That has always had an impact on my life. And I was particularly smitten by John Locke. John Locke, who believed in natural rights. Just out of curiosity, when I ask this question, usually people will get two of the natural rights correctly. I was wondering if anybody here believes that he or she knows what the three natural rights were.
Life, liberty, property.
Good. You must have had a class where you learned that.
Yes, Alex, I think you taught me.
And these natural rights are not to be found in old parchments or musty records. They are written by the Almighty himself, by a sunbeam, and they are part of the eternal, immutable truths. And no individual, no government can take away these basic rights. That is central to my core. And I think it's what guided this nation in terms of its beginning and has carried over till this day. Well, there was a man by the name of Samuel Seabury. He was a minister. And he wrote a paper called The Farmer, signed The Farmer, that was often done in those days, in which he claimed that having the British benevolently rule, quote unquote, the colonies, was really practicing natural rights. I wrote a refutation to that called The Farmer Refuted, and it circulated all throughout the colonies. And I became known as sort of a celebrity at King's College. In fact, I was sort of chided by some of my professors. You're making us look bad in terms of publishing things that get wide circulation. Ours do well if we get into one of these academic journals where only a few people read. But anyway, I took everything in stride in college. I was a brilliant student. In fact, I don't believe in false modesty, and I've checked some records. I was even brighter than Professor Ken Sabosky back there, whether you believe it or not. Well, unfortunately, there was all kinds of ferment going on. The clouds of war were very formidable. It became obvious that we were going to get into that kind of a situation. And so what I did is I went to the bank and I withdrew the money intended for my medical education. By that time, I'd already decided there were things better than being a practicing physician. And I organized my own artillery company. I used my influence with John Jay, who was a member of the Continental Congress at that time. I was appointed as a captain, and the war soon came. We had practiced our manual of arms every morning at 6 o'clock in the cemetery. And when war broke out, I recruited some of them to join. We didn't have enough. And so my friend Butch McGowan and I would often go around the bars at 3 a.m. in the morning and recruit some of our people who were hungover. We did have some desertions the following day. But the truth of the matter is we were very successful in fighting all over Manhattan, and particularly we distinguished ourselves in the Battery. How many people here have ever seen the Statue of Liberty? Well, the chances are that you took the boat from the Battery. And then it was on to New Jersey. And that was particularly enjoyable because in the Battle of Princeton, I had the just enjoyable experience of firing 2 cannonballs through the dormitory of the College of New Jersey. I thought that was pretty good payback. Well, I also had mastered French. I soon came to the attention of General Washington, and he approached me and said that he needed a person like me who had good writing skills and was competent in French and also knew something about fighting. And I said, with all due respect, I said, General, I want to be where the fighting is, and so I must turn you down. The general looked at me very sternly. He said, Alex, I do not take no for an answer. You are now a lieutenant colonel, and you are going to be my top aide. And that turned out to be a wonderful experience because throughout my whole life, Washington was a great mentor to me. And I was called upon by him to engage in certain secret missions. One of the things that bound me very closely to him is I had found out about the Conway Cabal, which was an effort underway to replace General Washington with General Gates. And I immediately contacted John Jay, who was a prominent member of the Continental Congress, and he used his influence to save Washington's command by one vote. Don't ever let anybody tell you that one vote is not important. Well, unfortunately, we had a situation then that while I believe strongly in liberty, I do not believe in anarchy. And it was very close to that. We had no power to raise troops on our own. We had no power to raise money to fight the war. We had to go begging, hat in hand, to the different governors. At that time, particularly in the state of New York, you might have heard this name before, but there was a venal old rascal by the name of Clinton. He served 21 years, 7 3-year terms. And then I went with General Washington to have the commander of the New Jersey militia swear their allegiance to their new nation, the United States of America. And he looked at the great general rather scornfully and said, New Jersey is our nation, not the so-called United States. So this is what we had to face. And the fact is, we didn't have enough money to go around to purchase sufficient rifles. And often when we had the rifles, we did not have gunpowder. And then many of the soldiers were without shoes and without adequate nutrition. We had a great deal of dysentery and typhoid. It was just a miserable situation. And then I'll never forget the January night in Valley Forge when the temperature dipped down to 12 below. And several of my comrades literally froze to death. And many of those who didn't freeze acquired gangrene and lost their lives slowly and painfully after that. After that battle, I wrote a letter to my good friend John Duane in which I said, if we are fortunate enough to win this war, I am vowing that I am going to do something that we will have the power to be able to defend ourselves, to not have to put up with a miserable situation like we had before. But, and so the fact is that even after the war was over, things were not good. 7 states still had their own navies. Maryland and Virginia got into a shooting war across the Potomac as to who actually owned the rights to it. New York City placed a humongous amount of taxes on goods coming to New York Harbor. New Jersey retaliated by putting a tax on the lighthouse that went up, that guided ships coming into New York Harbor. It was not a good situation. Well, I met a very brilliant young man by the name of James Madison, and we decided if we were going to create a feeling of unity between the different states, we had to develop interstate commerce. We had to break down these barriers between the states. And so we called for a convention at Annapolis, and of the 13 colonies at the beginning, only 7 showed up. It was quite disheartening. We thought we would try once more. And so we decided that we would have a meeting in Philadelphia for the purpose of amending the Constitution. Now that was going to be pretty difficult because under the old Articles of Confederation, it took a unanimous vote to have any kind of amendment. And so we also knew that we could not pull that off any better than we had succeeded in Annapolis. There were 2 great men that had to be there who were just stars of the day. One was a man who was a brilliant scientist, a philosopher, a sort of Bill Clinton of the times with the ladies, and that, of course, was, I'm sure you know, Ben Franklin. And the other, of course, was George Washington. I went down to see George Washington at Mount Vernon, and he told me flat out, everything is in disrepair here. And I'm just weary of this war that took so long. You can't count on me now. Well, I pleaded with him. That didn't do any good. And finally, I put it to him straight. I had that kind of relationship with the general. I said, look, all of what you have done will be a sheer sacrifice. Everything will go down, too, if you do not come to Philadelphia. You owe it to the rest of us who fought with you. And that sort of shamed Washington into it, and so he did come to Philadelphia. Now, the problem was, at Philadelphia, we had to do something in terms of violating the Constitution of the time. There was no way we were going to get a unanimous vote. On top of that, I was a delegate to the convention, but not very willingly by Governor Clinton. He did not care for me because I had chided him before about him being such a cheapskate in terms of supporting the war. And he had to appoint me, though, because I'd been a hero at the Battle of Yorktown. I'd pestered Washington enough where he finally let me into battle. But and also I had a very wealthy father-in-law, and that counted. So he reluctantly sent me, but he also sent two men named Lansing and Yates, whose sole purpose was to try to thwart me at every turn. Well, there were some very brilliant people at that convention. And what we did is we just decided that we would disregard the Arts Confederation. We would not amend it. We would just start anew. There were constitutional issues raised, but there was a job to be done. There were also very honest men at the convention. For example, like George Mason, who thought it would be too much power to the national government. They were sincere, honest men. There were also people like Governor Patrick Henry of Virginia, and he refused to come even after he'd been elected by the people there. And that was he very ineloquently said, "I smell a rat." And then there were people who showed up at the convention who were there just to undermine it at every turn, as Lansing and Yates were trying to do. So this was the situation that we faced. Now, I was a great believer in executive power, energy in the executive. I had seen what had happened before when you don't have a strong executive, as I had studied history. And Madison had confirmed that for me. And at first the idea was that the legislature would function as the executive. Well, I knew what Moses had once said, that if he had had to rely on a committee, he would have never got the Hebrew children out of Egypt. And so I also pointed out, too, that legislatures are debating societies. They are not known for getting things done. And in fact, I recited a little poem that went this way to show the disdain that people had for these do-nothing legislatures or do-too-much legislatures. And it was this. The legislator's corpse was laid away. Some laughed, some slanged. But I wept, for I had longed to see him hanged. And so finally, I got so disgusted with them, there were over 36 different proposals made for having an executive. Some would have it elected by the governor, some by the House, some by the Senate, just all kinds of confusion. I got disgusted and left, and I received a message from Washington throwing my own words back at me, and so I came back to the convention, and I was there at the end for the Committee on Style. And what we did under the guardianship of Gouverneur Morris is we were able to put in what we call the Morris Joker, whereby we had stipulated the powers of the national government, but we didn't delineate the powers of the executive. So it gave the executive enough leeway in order to do things. Also, we finally got through with the compromises, but we had to keep the windows shut because, like now, there were snooping newsmen outside. It was often 107, 108 degrees outside. George Washington would have to sternly give us that look, which settled us down. And then we would take breaks, And little Jemmy Madison, as serious a student he was just a fountain of ribald stories that kept us entertained and broke the tension. But we still had a tremendous battle, and it still goes on today. Do we represent by population or by states? And we finally reached that kind of a compromise whereby today we have a Senate that is, based on states, and the House, which is based on population. So finally, we got through the Constitution. It was a bundle of compromises. I, as well as Washington and Madison, were disappointed. There were many things not in there. But still, we had to get this approved. And we had enough foresight to know we weren't going to let the state legislatures have the deciding role in that, because they would not approve giving up that power. And so we decided to have constitutional conventions. But that wasn't going to be easy. In Virginia, Patrick Henry had appointed a constitutional convention for ratification that was sort of loaded. New York, that old rogue Clinton, did the same by spades. By a margin of 2.5 to 1, there were delegates there who were very much against ratifying the Constitution. And even though we only decided we needed 9 approval, nevertheless, Virginia, which is the largest state in the Union then, the gateway to the South, and New York, the gateway to New England, had to join. Well, what I did is I went up to Poughkeepsie, and I used my most lawyer-like arguments and did my best. Still, I could not get enough over to the side. But I also did this, what Bob Dole used to do. At night, I would go to the tavern and lean over and work one-on-one with the different people. And then finally, John Jay came up with an idea. We approached Governor Clinton and told him we had the support of New York City and the 6 southern counties, and we would pull out and join Canada if he did not see to it that the Constitution was ratified by New York State. He understood that kind of talk. Even so, we only carried by 3 votes. And so, as you can see, it was not easy. And despite the fact that Madison and Washington were down in Virginia, it was a tough row there. But finally, what we did to really nail things home is we decided to write a series of papers published in the newspaper called The Packet, later bound together as a book, called the Federalist Papers. And many times with tongue-in-cheek, we made it look like the states were getting more power than they actually were. And it was enough to convince the elite forces that we would be able to have a constitution that was fair, that left enough power to the states. This has become a debatable topic ever since. We had Article 6 in there, which was, supremacy for the national government. Later on, there was an insistence on amendments, such as Amendment 10, the States' Rights Amendment, which has always caused a conflict. Well, in the meantime, I had to start thinking in terms of making a living. I met my wife Betsy a year before we were married. We had a little baby that was just about due, and I had to think of what I could do to support my family. Well, at first I thought of being a lawyer. I had good writing and speaking skills. On the other hand, I am a Christian, and so, the two aren't exactly compatible with one another. I thought of being a businessman. Now, I still wanted to continue on in politics, and I know that if you're going to be a success in business, you've got to put in at least 28 or 29 hours a day. And so that was out. Finally, I came to the conclusion that I'm going to have to be a lawyer. But there was a problem. I didn't have any money to study law. I didn't have any money to support my family while I did an apprenticeship with a law firm. My wealthy father-in-law offered to underwrite all expenses. And I knew then now that you ought to know, if you don't know it now, if you let your father-in-law support you, you belong to him. And so that's something I wanted to avoid. Well, what I did is I decided to teach myself the law. With Blackstone in my hand, and baby Philip had come along, often rocking him, I would read my Blackstone. Then I would take long walks around the Grange where we lived, north of what is now Harlem. And then I would come back and I would write these notes down. And I studied those, and I'm proud to say I received the highest grade ever achieved on a bar exam up to that point. And I'm very pleased to get word that even today, Hamilton's notes updated are still sold to aspiring lawyers to the New York bar who need to pass the exam. So, in fact, I must say that Chancellor Kent was once asked, who was the best lawyer who ever appeared in your courtroom? He says, that's close, it's difficult. I would say Alexander Hamilton and Daniel Webster were the two best. I would rate them equal in terms of argumentation skills, but I would give Hamilton the edge in logical legal reasoning, and so I'm very proud of that. I also knew how to make money hand over fist, because I was considered the best lawyer in New York. I know this sounds immodest, but you don't want me to lie. And so this was the situation here. Now, I also had the honor of achieving the largest out-of-court settlement ever reached in New York up to that time, $150,000. My grateful client wrote me out a check for $50,000. Well, I did what Phil Journey would have done when he was practicing law. I said, that's too much money. I didn't do that much work. I tore up the check and I said, $10,000 will be enough. So if Phil Journey returns to a law practice, you know where to go to get a decent fee here. I am going to revert back here and let you know what it was like to fight in the Revolutionary War before we got to this point. It was a living hell. Just understaffed, underfunded, subject to the whims of governors. For example, Washington wanted to camp outside of Wilmington, Delaware for strategic purposes. He soon received a note from the Philadelphia legislature saying if he did not forthwith move his troops to outside of Philadelphia and give Philadelphia merchants their business, there would be no more boys from Pennsylvania or any more financial support from Pennsylvania. This is no way to fight a war. So this was pretty much the situation that we had in fighting that war. We were very, very fortunate to win. But even after it was over, the British refused to honor the treaty and abandoned the forts along the Canadian border here. We had sailors impressed off of ships, wrongfully claiming that they were really British subjects. I mean, it was just a disgraceful type of situation. But anyway, we had to do something to strengthen ourselves. And so I became a strong advocate of us becoming not only the strongest military power in the world, but the strongest economic power. Now, Washington wanted the best and the brightest in his cabinet, and he included both Hamilton and Jefferson there. We did not particularly get along. He was very naive in some respects. He thought all debts should be canceled after 20 years. Can you imagine a mortgage being given to somebody who could, at the end of the 20th year on a 30-year mortgage, just cancel it and start anew? He also believed that everybody should have his own plot of land and live, you know, a sort of idyllic type of life. And I believe the fact that we were destined to develop our industry and our economic wherewithal. So there were sharp differences there. I'm also very proud of the fact that as Secretary of the Treasury, I put in a very sound system. And unlike today, I did not tolerate waste. I required weekly reports from the different agencies. I would make surprise visits to different Army and Navy posts. And it was just a very efficiently run operation because I thought, as I still do, that public office is a public trust. And I want to tell you something else, too. In my day, we did not have $65 screwdrivers or $600 toilet seats. I did not, you know, counter any of that. I would say, finally, that as I look back, we've had problems, but we've been up to it. We are beset with many, many problems, both domestically and in the international scene. But I say, rather than despair and to be despondent, we would do well to follow the Chinese proverb which tells us that rather than curse the darkness, it is better to light a single candle. because one candle can light another, and another, and each another, turn another, until finally that which is dark has turned into light. And so the question I'll leave each of you young people with is, who here will light that candle? Thank you.
Amen.